There is a millennial individual standing in their kitchen on a Thursday morning, making coffee, and everything is fine. The job is good. Not perfect, but good. The kind of good that people mean when they say you should be grateful. And they are right. And the millennial individual knows they are right. The relationship is stable. The apartment is clean. The commute is manageable. There are plans for the weekend. There are savings, modest ones, moving in the right direction. There is, by any reasonable external accounting, a life that is working. And then the coffee maker finishes, and the millennial individual picks up the cup and looks out the window at an unremarkable Thursday morning. And a thought arrives that they have learned to process quickly, before it can settle into anything that requires examination. The thought is something like, is this the one? Not articulated quite that cleanly. More like a flicker, a brief, peripheral awareness that somewhere in the space of all the possible lives that could have been lived from the same starting point, there are others. Different cities, different work, different sequences of choices, different versions of the self, living versions of the story that the current self chose against, or more often did not so much choose against as simply did not choose at all. The path was taken. The other paths were not. And most of the time, this is simply how things are unremarkable, unexamined. But on Thursday mornings sometimes, between the coffee and the commute, the flicker arrives. The millennial individual finishes the coffee. The Thursday continues. The flicker is processed quickly, before it can become anything. This is one of the quieter and less frequently discussed forms of millennial psychological experience, because it is very difficult to talk about without sounding ungrateful, dissatisfied, or insufficiently committed to a life that is, by the standards available, good. There is a specific social pressure around gratitude in adulthood. The understanding that having a stable job and a workable relationship and a clean apartment is enough is, in fact, more than enough for many people. And that the person who has these things and still occasionally wonders if they are the right things is committing a mild, but real social transgression by wondering at all. And so the millennial individual does not say it out loud. They file it under something more acceptable. Stress, tiredness, the ordinary dissatisfaction of a demanding week. And they move through the Thursday and the Friday and the weekend. And they do not mention the flicker to anyone because the flicker is not a problem. It is just a thought. It passes. It comes back. It passes again. There is a concept in developmental psychology called identity foreclosure, introduced by the researcher James Marcia as an expansion of Erik Erikson's work on identity formation. Foreclosure describes a specific pattern in which a person adopts an identity, a set of commitments about who they are, what they do, what they value, without having gone through a genuine period of exploration. The identity is not dishonest. It is not fabricated, but it was adopted, often under external pressure, or through the path of least resistance in a specific developmental moment, before the full range of possible identities had been considered. Foreclosure is not inherently pathological. It is common, and it often produces stable and functional lives. The person who becomes an accountant because their parent was an accountant, or who lives in their hometown because moving felt too uncertain, or who stays in an industry because the investment of early training made leaving feel unthinkable. These are people who may be entirely content with their foreclosed identities. Many are, but for a significant number of people, the foreclosed identity produces what Marcia described as a peculiar flatness, a life that functions well and feels. From the inside, slightly insufficient, not wrong exactly, not bad, just not quite confirmed, not quite arrived at through a process that feels like genuine authorship. The millennial individual looking out their kitchen window on Thursday morning is experiencing this flatness. The question is this: the one is not a declaration of dissatisfaction. It is an absence of the felt sense that this particular life, of all the possible lives, is genuinely theirs. The millennial individual's generation had a specific relationship to this foreclosure pattern, and it was shaped by the economic conditions of their early adulthood in ways that are worth understanding clearly. The period in which identity is most actively and consequentially formed runs roughly from the late teens through the mid-20s, the years in which the available options are still open, the commitments are not yet fully made, and the person is most developmentally prepared to explore who they might become. For the millennial individual, this period coincided with the 2008 recession and its aftermath. The recession did not simply reduce available opportunities. It restructured the psychological experience of choice. Under conditions of economic contraction, the luxury of exploration, trying a thing to see if it fits, leaving a path to pursue a different one, spending a period in deliberate uncertainty, became a luxury that the conditions did not easily support. The practical pressure was to find something stable and stay there. The psychological message, delivered through a culture of scarcity and the ever-present awareness of precarity, was that the wrong choice was a catastrophe, stability was survival, and the person who had a job in their field was in no position to question whether the field was the right one. The millennial individual who arrived at their mid-20s with a stable career trajectory and stayed on it, not because they had explored the alternatives and found them less compelling, but because the economic landscape of their formative formative years made exploration feel dangerous. That person did not fully author their own identity. They inherited the conditions, and the conditions, more than any genuine self-examination, determined the shape of the life. This is worth sitting with because it is not the same as saying the millennial individual made the wrong choices. The choices were often reasonable, sometimes excellent, frequently the best available under the circumstances. The career they have may suit them well. The city they stayed in may be genuinely where they belong. The relationship they are in may be genuinely right. The question is not whether the outcomes were good. The question is whether the process felt like genuine authorship, whether the millennial individual, at the key decision points that shaped their current life, felt like they were choosing from a genuine set of alternatives rather than accepting the most stable option available in a landscape that made everything else feel too risky to attempt. For many millennial individuals, the honest answer is that they do not know because they never fully tested the alternatives. The road not taken was not so much abandoned after consideration as simply never entered because the conditions of the moment made the conventional road feel like the only viable one. The untested alternative carries weight the tested and rejected one does not. It remains theoretically perfect, unfalsified, waiting. The Thursday morning flicker is the weight of the untested alternative making itself known. It is not grief, exactly. It is not regret, exactly. It is a particular variety of wondering that has no resolution available to it. Because the resolution would require a counterfactual, the millennial individual would have to somehow know what the other life felt like from the inside in order to determine whether it was preferable, and that knowledge is not available. The wondering cannot be answered. It can only be felt periodically in the kitchen on Thursday mornings, and processed quickly before the commute. This is why the conventional advice about this experience, follow your passion. It's never too late. You can always change, lands so poorly for the millennial individual who is carrying it. The advice assumes the question is practical. Can the other life still be reached? The actual question is something more interior. Was I ever really the author of this one? Authorship is not recovered by switching careers or moving cities or making dramatic external changes, though sometimes those things help. Authorship is recovered by the more difficult and less visible work of examining the key decision points in the current life and determining, as honestly as possible, which of them were genuinely chosen and which were simply taken because the conditions of the moment made them feel inevitable. This examination does not change the decisions, but it does change the person's relationship to them, which is the thing that the Thursday morning flicker is, in its inarticulate way, asking to be changed. There's also a specific cognitive distortion operating in the background of the wondering, and it is worth naming because it makes the wondering considerably more painful than the reality it describes warrants. The alternative life the millennial individual occasionally imagines, the one in the different city, the different work, the different version of the self is imagined in curated form. It is the best version of the alternative, the creative life that actually paid off, the different city that was genuinely better, the different relationship that felt like genuine completion, the different path that produced the feeling of authentic authorship the current path has not reliably provided, the difficulties of the alternative, the uncertainty, the periods of failure, the costs that would have been paid that are not visible in the imagined version, are not included in the image. The current life, by contrast, is known in full detail, including all its compromises, its limitations, its specific unglamorous textures. The comparison is between the highlight reel of the unlived alternative and the unedited footage of the actual life. That comparison cannot produce any conclusion other than the current life is insufficient, because the comparison itself is structurally rigged. This does not mean the current life is perfect, or that the wondering is irrational, or that the alternative path would definitely have been worse. It means that the wondering is operating on a systematically inflated picture of the alternative, and a more accurate accounting would include the difficulties and costs that the image of the alternative is silently omitting. The recovery from the Thursday morning flicker is not a dramatic change of life, and it is not the suppression of the wondering. It is something more specific, the gradual recovery of the felt sense of authorship within the current life, by examining which elements of it are genuinely chosen and which are simply inherited from the conditions that shaped it, and by making more conscious and deliberate choices, even small ones, in the domains where the inheritance has been running on autopilot. The millennial individual who wonders if they chose the wrong life is rarely, in the accurate version of the accounting, in the wrong life entirely. They are more usually in the right life, plus a significant number of accumulated unchosen elements that accumulated through the path of least resistance during the economically hostile years of their formation. The work is not to abandon the life. It is to progressively, imperfectly, and without any guarantee of resolution, make the life more genuinely theirs. The coffee will still be made on Thursday mornings. The commute will still happen, but occasionally the kitchen window and the unremarkable Thursday morning will be able to hold something that feels slightly more like authorship than inheritance, and the flicker, when it comes, will have a slightly different different quality to it, not the absence of wondering, just the wondering of someone writing their own story in some small and ongoing way. There's one more thing worth saying to the millennial individual who has spent years moving quickly past the flicker because examining it felt like ingratitude or the beginning of a disruption they could not afford. The wondering is not a symptom of a broken life. It is a symptom of a person who cares about whether their life is genuinely theirs, and that caring, however inconvenient, is not a problem. It is evidence of exactly the kind of self-awareness that makes authorship possible. The person who never wonders has not necessarily solved it. They may simply have stopped listening for the question. The millennial individual who lets the flicker arrive without immediately processing it away has not lost the plot. They may slowly and imperfectly be finding it. Thanks for watching. If this felt familiar, leave a comment. And the next time the Thursday morning flicker arrives, consider whether it is asking you to change your life or simply to know it a little more honestly.